Hello, good evening to all the listeners and the viewers to History Indoors. I'm just going to wait a few minutes, or just a couple of minutes, just for people to join, and then I'll introduce tonight's speaker. So if you just bear with us for a couple more minutes. Thank you. Hello, good evening. If anybody's watching, if you just bear with us for one more minute, we're just going to wait for some more people to join us, and then I'll be introducing this evening's talk. Thank you. Okay, good evening and welcome to History Indoors. My name's Josh De Cruz, and it's my privilege to introduce this evening's talk, which is by Alex Cooper of the University of Leicester. And as you can see, tonight's talk is on the British and the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies in the 19th century. After the presentation, there will be an opportunity for Q&As. And if you have any questions, please just post the comments, post it as a comment, and then I'll relay it to Alex, and we can have a Q&A session after the talks come to an end. If you know anybody that's interested, please ask them if they want in future. Their talks and subsequent History Indoors talks will be available on the History Indoors YouTube channel, and so you'll be able to view them there. Right, okay. And so without any further ado, good evening, Alex, and thank you, and I look forward to the talk. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Josh, and thanks for History Indoors for hosting this evening, and a chance to welcome you all to Sicily, and Sicily in the 19th century. The title of my talk is The British and the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, from 1816 to 1861. And these dates correspond to the creation of the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies at the Congress of Vienna at the end of the Napoleonic Wars, with its balance of power orchestrated by Metternich, and the fall of the same kingdom with Garibaldi's Mille at the beginning of the campaign for unification to create the modern state of Italy as we know it today. This is a relatively neglected period in Italian history, obscured by greater events such as Napoleon's downfall and Cavour's unification. Yet, it is a phase which is crucial for understanding the modern history of Italy, Sicily, and the North-South dilemma in particular. It also explains the long-lasting tie economically, politically, and on a social cultural level with Britain and America, which has had such a significant implication for these countries in modern times. To start with, what do we mean by the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies? The name recalls the Latin title Regnum Sicily, dating back to 1130, when the two halves, Naples on the mainland and the island of Sicily, were united in one kingdom. From 1265 to 1816, the two halves were separated again, separated into Sicilia Citra, or in Italian, Al di qua, which literally means on this side of the Straits of Messina, that is Naples and the mainland, firstly under the Angevins, and Sicily Ultrafarum, or Al di là in Italian, which meant on the other side of the Straits of Messina. That was Sicily under the Aragons and later under the French, then the Habsburgs, then the Spanish Bourbons. Charles V of Bourbon would reconquer both halves to be proclaimed King of the Two Sicilies. When Charles left his throne in 1759 to his 9-year-old son, Ferdinando, to become Charles III of Spain, Ferdinando had two titles, Ferdinando IV of Naples and Ferdinando III of Sicily. Ferdinando was the 9th longest reigning monarch in history. His reign lasted over 65 years. In Naples, the government was first run by Bernardo Tanucci and then by the British Sir John Acton until 1803, while Sicily was entrusted to a viceroy. Ferdinand IV of Naples was exiled twice to Palermo during the Napoleonic Wars, firstly in 1798 and the second time for his longest stay on the island from 1806 to 1816. The Royal Navy evacuated the court on both occasions. The first time, Admiral Nelson himself took the royal family to Palermo and resided there together with the Hamiltons, the Nobles, and Abraham Gibbs. The second period of exile, from 1806 to 1816, was known as the British Decade in Sicily, as Ferdinand remained allied to Britain in exchange for a handsome subsidy of £400,000 a year, paid in instalments by the British government through the King's banker, Abraham Gibbs. Abraham Gibbs was the cousin of Anthony Gibbs, the more well-known founder of the London merchant bank, Anthony Gibbs and Sons. In 1806, Abraham enjoyed far more success and wealth than Anthony could ever have dreamt of. The British had to defend the Bourbon monarchy and Sicily against Joachim Murat and against Ferdinand's own scheming wife, Marie Caroline, Marie Antoinette's sister. She was a Francophile who filled Palermo with spies against the British. The British published the British Gazette as propaganda against Napoleon in Messina, where the Royal Navy was based. But events came to a head in 1812 when Lord Bentinck made Ferdinand abdicate temporarily in favour of his son, Francis I, and sent Marie Caroline back to Vienna. The same year, Sicily was granted a constitution, and the 1812 constitution ended feudalism. The constitution would last 3 years, but its suppression would be the source of social malcontent throughout the Bourbon's reign in the early 19th century. The merchants and merchant bankers of the British Decade imported products from the industrial cities of northern England, previously blocked by Napoleon's continental blockade and the US embargo. These products included textiles, both wool and cottons, while Sicily exported wine, sulfur, sumac, citrus fruit, and olive oil to the UK. Nelson himself ordered large quantities of Marsala wine from John Woodhouse's winery in Marsala for the Royal Navy, while Abraham Gibbs shipped Marsala wine to the United States. Sulfur and wine were to be the two most important commodities for Sicily in the 19th century. And after 1815, Sicily became the world's largest producer of sulfur, absolutely essential for the British Industrial Revolution. The British chemists and industrialists, James Muspratt of Liverpool and Charles Tennant of Glasgow, the founders of ICI, as well as James Stephenson, all had sulfur mines in Sicily. Caught out, however, by a series of terrible coincidences in 1816, Abraham Gibbs went bankrupt and committed suicide. His successor, the gentleman we can see in the slide, Benjamin Ingham, had studied Gibbs's business strategies at length and seen the potential for commerce between Sicily, Malta, the UK, and the USA. Ingham may have lacked the originality of Gibbs, but had greater diligence over his methods, clients, and bookkeeping. Gibbs' untimely death was an enormous opportunity for Ingham, who, copying Gibbs's methods of creating networks of agents throughout Sicily and Malta, had become a respected merchant and banker in Palermo, Messina, and Marsala. Ingham's own family in Leeds produced textiles. The firm was known as Ingham Brothers and Company. And initially, Ingham traded his family wares in Palermo. However, from the start, Ingham saw the potentiality of Marsala wine, and from 1806 exported it too. By 1812, Benjamin had established his own house as Benjamin Ingham & Co. and had a dense network of clients and agents throughout Sicily and Malta. Ingham would become a multi-millionaire by his death in 1861, due to his astute business skills and choice of business partners and business ventures. The British factory, or the British community, was concentrated by 1816 in three main cities, Palermo, Messina, and Marsala, but also it existed in many other towns such as Catania, Syracuse, Riposto, and Licata. All of these were town ports and were deeply involved with commodity trading and the services related to this, such as insurance and shipping. The communities themselves formed dense networks for commercial and social cultural reasons and gravitated around specific reference points in each city, mainly top businessmen or British councils, or both. In Palermo, the business centre was Piazza Marina. In Messina, the Palazzata, and in Marsala, the Bohero seafront. The physical vicinity among the members of the British community and their businesses was reflected in family ties, religious worship, and cultural pursuits. Thus, when Ferdinand IV of Naples and III of Sicily became King of the Two Sicilies in 1816, he left Palermo forever to return to Naples and reunite the two halves of his kingdom into one realm. Naples had been under French and Franco-Swiss administration, while Sicily had been British. Ferdinand left a lieutenant general in charge of Sicily to govern over the island that bitterly resented the king's abrupt volte-face. The first episode was the Carbonari uprising in 1820, the second, the uprisings of 1837, and the last serious rebellion before Garibaldi's arrival in 1859 was the 1848 revolution in Sicily. To cover the damages caused by the uprising, the king's representative, the lieutenant general, was forced to seek loans from the foreign banks in Naples. And Metternich lost no time in sending Charles Mayer von Rothschild to Naples to negotiate a loan with Falconet, Gibbs's ex-partner, to the Bourbon crown. These loans to Sicily and to the Bourbon crown continued throughout the first half of the 19th century until 1858, when the Sicilian treasury finally regained stability, just in time for Garibaldi to dry up the newfound Sicilian liquidity for his campaign to unite Italy. Another debt Sicily had to pay off concerned the British and the French merchants damaged by the so-called Sulfur War of 1838 to 1840. This war is rarely mentioned, but was quite an episode of international tension between Britain, France, and the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, and caused the British merchants, the Board of Trade, and Lord Palmerston to intervene directly in the economy and governing of the Two Sicilies. British merchants had invested heavily in sulfur mines in Sicily, and sulfur extracted there guaranteed British supremacy in the Industrial Revolution. When Ferdinand I's grandson, Ferdinand II, decided to grant the sulfur monopoly to the French company Tax Icard and Company, the British merchants protested against this royal decision. Although no actual war broke out, this was an episode in which Lord Palmerston employed the Royal Navy to back his gunboat diplomacy and force Ferdinand II to change his mind. The British merchants were given the right to compensation, together with the firm Tax Icard, which consequently lost its monopoly. From 1840s onwards, although alternatives to sulfur were in use, sulfur remained one of the most profitable commodities traded internationally, and Sicily was the world's primary supplier. Meanwhile, the rise of the steamship began to change the ship-owning sector. Ingham, like most successful local businessmen, like Baron Reason or the Baron Chiaramonte Bordenaro and Fiammingo, had his own fleet of ships. In 1839, Ingham became famous for sending his captain, Di Bartolo, on the ship Elisa to Sumatra. King Ferdinand II awarded Ingham a knighthood, the Order of San Ferdinando II, something which Ingham treasured. Ingham's fleet had grown constantly, and his strategy ensured a fully laden ship on both the outgoing and incoming voyages, loading goods for other British merchants in Palermo, Messina, and Marsala in order to complete his cargoes. Ships often stopped off at ports around Sicily to make up their loads before setting sail to the United States or to the United Kingdom. Ingham had the best captains in Palermo and entrusted them not only with the freight, but also with the necessary payments involved in long-distance voyages to America and the Far East. Like local businessmen, Ingham was also partner to insurance firms. The Palermo Insurance Company of 1830, and he spread his insurance risks among local Sicilian firms, British Marine Insurance, and agents such as Lloyd's of London and Bibby's of Liverpool. Maritime insurance had grown enormously since 1816 in Palermo and Messina, and many Anglo-Sicilian firms were created in the 1830s and 40s. The most famous firm of steamships that Ingham was the major shareholder of was the 1840 Sicilian Steamship Company, whose other shareholders included Vincenzo Florio and even the Rothschilds. This company lasted until the Revolution, when its ships were confiscated by Ferdinand II. Yet it paved the way for Florio's rise as a major ship owner and one of the 4 firms in 1862 to be responsible for the new National Postal Service of the Kingdom of Italy. 1848 marked a watershed in Sicilian history. It caused severe repression of the Sicilian population by the Bourbons, who used Swiss mercenaries against the rebels. Indeed, Ferdinand II became known on the island as Re Bomba, or King Bomb, in 1849 for his destruction of Messina. Ferdinand adopted harsh measures of economic repression against Sicily. The National Bank, created in 1848 in Palermo and Messina, was suppressed by the new Bourbon Royal Bank, inaugurated in 1850. But this bank was never granted permission to cash its bills or checks on the mainland. Sicily was completely ostracized and paid the heavy debt through new Rothschild loans to the crown for having rebelled against Bourbon rule. Many revolutionaries fled to London to wait for the moment when Garibaldi's expedition left for Marsala to return to Italy. Indeed, Garibaldi chose Sicily as his first landing place, and specifically Marsala, on his way up the peninsula to unite and conquer the new kingdom of Italy. By the time Garibaldi arrived in Sicily, Ingham had reached the apex of his career, and other local businessmen who copied Ingham's strategies had also risen to success. The most famous example was Vincenzo Florio, a merchant who invested in Marsala and sulfur like Ingham, and who, like Ingham, sat on the most prestigious board of directors of Palermo. Ingham sat on the boards of the Chamber of Commerce and the Stock Exchange, while Florio was one of the governors of the Royal Bank. Like their London contemporaries, these merchant bankers knew their privileged position was strengthened by board membership, and they controlled the flow of information and capital in a tight oligarchy of selected members. Vincenzo Florio lived 7 years longer than Ingham and saw unification completed before his own son took over his business. whereas Ingham left his empire to his nephew Joseph Whitaker and Joseph's son, Ingham's great-nephew, also called Benjamin, to carry on his work. These men would reap the benefits of Ingham's real estate and railroad investments in Europe and America. By 1860, Garibaldi was well on his way to uniting Italy. The kingdom of the two Sicilies had a new but very short-lived king, Francis II, whose reign started in 1859 only to end at the beginning of 1861. It was the end of an era and the dawn of a new one for Italy and for Sicily, but also for the British community in Sicily, which would have to adapt yet again to a new balance of power in the state. The British community, however, adapted well, and the era of the so-called Belle Époque was at the doors, when Palermo would enjoy its golden moment as the centre of culture and entrepreneurship in the Kingdom of Italy. Little of that era of wealth and well-being which British and Sicilians enjoyed at the turn of the last century remains. After 2 world wars and the 1908 earthquake, which destroyed the British factory in Messina. Today, Ingham's residence is a hotel, the Grand Hotel des Palms, and 3 of the Whitakers' homes have become, respectively, a hospital, Villa Sofia, the police prefecture, Villa Whitaker, and lastly, home to the Whitaker Foundation at Villa Malfitano, which miraculously survived the building speculation of the 1960s, known as the sack of Palermo. The foundations of economic well-being laid by these protagonists and their destiny in the 20th century is strangely pertinent to Italy today. Although Mussolini's laws forced the British to close down in Sicily, Ingham's winery, like that of Woodhouse and Florio, being bought up by Cinzano in 1924, Benjamin Ingham's baglio is still standing, and his great-nephew, Pip Whitaker's island of Mozia, is famous with archaeologists worldwide, thanks to Pip Whitaker's excavations there. It is certain that the history of Sicily and the Kingdom of Italy would have been quite different without the British community in the 19th century. From a political point of view, the seeds sown by the British decade with the 1812 Constitution fueled the Sicilian desire for autonomy, which is still a very live issue in Italy today. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope you enjoyed coming to Sicily.
Thank you so much, Alex. That was fascinating, really fascinating, and an area aspect of history that, and I suppose to a certain extent, an aspect of British history that is really underplayed and little known. If anybody listening, watching in has got any questions or any comments that they'd like to post, please post them in the comment box and I'll relay them to Alex. While we're waiting to see if anybody does have any questions or comments they'd like to add, I would like to take the chair's privilege and ask them a question myself, Alex, and that is, the British in Sicily, you mentioned that really the era of the Mussolini era, the fascist era, sort of removed their presence. Is there any sort of living legacy or legacy at all, and any sort of acknowledgement of what they did in Sicily today?
Oh, good question. Because I think history sometimes can be very cruel, and Mussolini actually, with the racial laws, forbid any foreign companies from operating. So basically, the British companies just had to move out. It also coincided with a moment where the Florios were in financial difficulty, so the option was just to sell everything to the company of Cinzano in the end. But what remained until the 1960s were the homes, the wealth. The Whitaker family, I think the last survivor, the direct survivor, was Delia Whitaker, and who passed away in 1971. She lived in Villa Malfitano. So that was the last heir, and this has become now a foundation. Thank goodness they've made it into the Whitaker Foundation, and it's a beautiful, beautiful place to visit. Has a wonderful garden filled with the most amazing plants you'll ever seen in Palermo, in the city centre. And so they say the vestiges of these families have survived, but much has been just wiped away and cancelled out by the Second World War, unfortunately, including the records, the company records and everything.
Right, I see. I see. So it's sort of the legacy has come to an end.
Because in fact, yes, the family, I suppose the direct family came to an end, like the Florios. They were like 3 generations of amazing entrepreneurs, and then the family, I suppose, branched off into other interests. Pip Whitaker was an amazing person. He inherited the company and spent his time doing archaeologists. He was a famous archaeologist. He was also an ornithologist and has written many books, if anybody listening is an ornithologist, and found many rare species which are actually called after him, Whitaker, as species. No, so they decided to change. I suppose they had enough money to be able to do other things in life.
Right. Okay. We haven't had any questions, so I'm just going to, before I wrap things up, I am going to be greedy and ask you one other question, and that really is my knowledge and my understanding of the slightly later period of Sicilian history comes from the book The Leopard, Lampedusa's The Leopard, and I just wondered whether, I mean, that's all about the change in Sicilian society and Italian society, and there's one of the famous remarks is for everything to stay the same, everything must change. And I just wondered whether you could tell us something about how the hopes of the period, or the immediate aftermath of the period that you're talking about, what happened?
Yes. Well, I think the actual arrival of Garibaldi was seen as a moment where Sicily could maybe be liberated from the Bourbon kings and end this era of total. They were totally separated. I mean, there were measures where they couldn't even change money. The banks, they couldn't. They couldn't use them on the mainland, so it was really difficult for Sicilian business people. So I think they welcomed maybe the change, but it was a change which then turned against them, because of course the power moved up to the north of Italy, and it changed the balance yet again. And ironically, the same thing, I suppose, happened in the end of the Second World War, because at the end of the Second World War, the first part of Italy to be liberated was Sicily. And Sicily was granted, it's one of the 5 autonomous regions. It's called an autonomous region because they have a special statute. It was granted special powers and special privileges at the end of the Second World War. And I suppose the Sicilians welcomed the Americans as they'd welcomed Garibaldi, expecting maybe a change in their status. And yet again, things went back to normal and Sicily was forgotten. And history seems to repeat itself. But it definitely, yes, it's part of the Sicilian culture, and what's written in The Leopard is a very, very interesting book to be read. And also, if anybody likes Leonardo Sciascia, Sciascia also had a similar metaphor where he used of reeds in a river being flattened by the flow of water when there's a flood, but then the reeds, when the flood passes, the reeds get up again, they pick up again and come back. And that's a demonstration that, yes, the Sicilians have been invaded maybe by every other nation, but they always pick themselves up and come back.
Right, thank you, Alex, and that's a
You're
great
welcome, very welcome.
that's a great positive defiant note to end this evening's talk. So thanks everybody for listening. Thanks to Alex. History Indoors talks are available on the History Indoors YouTube channel. So if you've liked this and you've enjoyed it, please look at our range of talks and tell your friends. And so on that note, I bid you all a very good night. Thanks,
Josh. Thank you.